Can you imagine any other industry in which companies made vast amounts of money from children, and there were credible charges from a lot of parents that this thing had killed their children, and 30% of the girls who used this product said, it has harmed my mental health. And leaks from the company said, we are harming their mental health. If there was any other consumer product that had this record, it would have been banned and sued into non-existence instantly. And for some reason, we've just accepted technology is inevitable. Well, what are you going to do? Well, guess what? We can do something.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Now, I think most of y'all know that I have a 7-year-old and a newly 5-year-old, and we talk a lot about screen time in our household, or rather, we argue about it. That's why today's guest, Jonathan Haidt, is kind of a celebrity in our household. He is the social psychologist and professor at NYU's Stern School of Business who wrote The Anxious Generation. I'm sure you've heard of the book. You probably know John for exactly this work around the negative mental health impact of screens and social media for kids. But you know, after publishing The Anxious Generation, John realized that we're facing an even bigger problem caused by our screen time, and that's the diminishing of attention broadly. And yeah, I worry about that for my kids, but this is a problem that you and I are suffering as well. In this episode, John and I talk about the great rewiring of childhood, how both kids and adults become addicted to our screens, and we get into some solutions to get us back in control of our attention. Here's John. I want to start by confiding in you about my tortured relationship with my telephone.
Okay, everyone has one. Go ahead.
So I began 2026, and I was like, I'm a disciple, I'm a student of the internet, and I realized that everybody around me seemed to be taking these technology breaks. Mm-hmm. They announced the technology Shabbat, they were going off of this or that social platform, and I thought, I need that too. I am going to start sleeping with my phone outside my room.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I am a grown-up. I'm actually quite decent at self-discipline. I made it 4 days. And then about a week later, I tried again, and I made it another 3 days. But the thing that I'm just curious about is, like, does everybody have this struggle, John? Where does your phone live at night?
Well, my phone actually lives right next to my bed because I have no problem with my phone for a very simple reason. I'm almost always on a computer, and I hate typing on the phone. I just hate it. So, we all got, I'm 62 years old. Everyone who got an iPhone back in 2007, 2008, 2009, it was an amazing Swiss Army knife. You pulled it out when you needed something. And for me, since I'm not really on social media, and I don't play video games, so I never put what we call slot machine apps. I never put on any apps that reward me on a variable ratio schedule. So I have no addiction problems with my phone. Now, I have attention problems on my computer, and I can't stay on one task. And I'm 62. Last week, I actually started using a website blocker. So I certainly understand the problems, and I teach a course at NYU. Most of my students have the problem. So it's not everyone who has the problem, but I would say it's most people under 30 and a lot of people over 30.
Most people under 30, a lot of people over 30, but what you're pointing to really in that answer is that the problem is not the phone. The problem is a problem of attention.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So much of the way that I came to your work was through the lens of young people. I have young children. You have spent years studying moral psychology and culture well before the launch of The Anxious Generation. So when you look at young people today, what's the most important change that you see that you would like us to see?
Mm-hmm. I think the word diminishment is the proper word. Mm-hmm. There's a pervasive diminishment. And what I mean by that, I don't in any way mean it as an insult. I don't ever blame Gen Z or young people. What happened, what I argue in The Anxious Generation is that there was a great rewiring of childhood. It's a tragedy in 2 acts. First, we took away a free play childhood. We took away childhood in the real world beginning in the 90s, and that was devastating, although mental health didn't fall at first in the 90s and 2000s.
And that taking away of free play was basically based on our rising belief that people were going to harm our children if we let them out of our sight.
That's right. Those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, we had free-range childhoods. After school and on weekends, we were out with our friends. And that's sort of the normal human developmental plan. You need a lot of unsupervised time in order to learn how to be self-supervising.
Sure.
And in the 90s, just as crime rates were plunging, just as the murder rate was plunging, we freaked out about child abduction, sexual abuse, stranger danger. And so we had a vast overreaction, which begins to diminish people's capabilities. But it's really 2010 to 2015 is the crucial period for the story, because in 2010, everyone has a flip phone. Right. The iPhone comes out in 2007, but very few teens have a flip phone. In 2010, they're all using their Motorola Razr. You can call, you can text, and you can play Snake. Like, that's it. That's all you could do. So
Snake was a good game.
Okay, right. So you're of that generation. Yeah. So a flip phone is a fine communication tool. In 2010, the iPhone gets a front-facing camera. In 2012, Facebook buys Instagram, and that's when all the girls get on it. By 2015, everyone has a smartphone, front-facing camera, Instagram and other social media platforms, unlimited data, or at least unlimited texting. And so we have a phone-based childhood. And so I'm sorry, this is sort of a roundabout way of answering your question. When you take away most of childhood, you take away outdoor play, you take away a lot of sunshine, you take away a lot of sleep, you take out books, because once you get into this, you stop reading books. You take out risk, thrill, you take out a lot of group activities, and you just have a lot of scrolling. It's 5 hours a day is the average that American teens spend online. So there's a diminishment of capabilities, of social skills, of happiness, and we've got to stop it.
I have to say, as you speak, just the word diminishment evokes such sadness in me. But as I listen to what you're talking about, it feels to me like there's this quality that we have stripped away from childhood, which is just actually a quality that we're stripping out of life generally, which is a quality of friction.
That's one, yes.
We don't allow things to be just naturally hard or slow or boring in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And we live under the belief that by optimizing for speed, ease, quickness, we win. I'm not sure what we win, right. But there's something that we win.
That's a great way to formulate it. I'll just add on to it by saying, if we want to look at master variables, friction is definitely one. That's a good one. But let's also put on time, the sense of that you have time, the sense that you're not rushed, you're not pressured. Okay, so I remember childhood as being one where there was a lot of time, especially in the summers. I remember being bored. I remember thinking, should I, do this hobby or that hobby? I had to call friends. Yeah. So there was a lot of time in childhood, and there was also friction, because anything you wanted to do, you had to decide, am I going to call my friend? Am I going to walk over there? When you get older, you're interested, in dating. So there used to be time and friction.
Right.
And what we have now is very little time, because we're all spending many hours a day doing stuff on our phones. We have very little time for the rest of life, especially young people do. And there's very little friction. Yeah. And so for adults, that is a recipe for a lot of productivity in adulthood and burnout.
Yeah.
But for kids, they don't need efficiency. They don't need frictionless, easy access to every vice ever invented. They need time. Right. And the pervasive one thing I find talking to young people, they can never keep up because they're on multiple platforms. Right. For me, email and texting is overwhelming, but they've got 3 other platforms typically.
Right. Well, and they've got us telling them that they don't have enough time. We're role modeling that they don't have enough time.
Right.
And then we're actually telling them.
We have to all multitask.
Right. So one thing that I want to explore before we move out of the realm of youth and into how some of this work applies more broadly is the distinct differences between genders when we're talking about the harm, in particular, that technology creates.
Yeah. No, good. This is really important for everyone to understand, especially I'm sure there are a lot of parents in the audience here. The story when I started this was social media is hurting girls. Yeah. And that evidence is really, really clear. That's what the kids themselves say. 30% of American teen girls say that social media has damaged their own mental health. That is many, many millions of girls are saying that they've been harmed. There's correlational data, there's experimental data, there's so many leaks from the companies themselves. So we know that social media is really hurting girls' mental health, and especially Instagram, social comparison, all of that. So that's what it was when I started working on this. And I didn't know what the story was for boys when I started the book.
Right.
But as we did, Zach Roush, my research partner, as we did the research in 2022, 2023, I think we came to a view that I think has been vindicated, which is for boys, a lot of bad things happen on social media. a lot of sextortion. A lot of kids are dead and they committed suicide because they were, sextortion is especially aimed at 13 to 15-year-old boys on sports teams. That's like the prototypical. That's what they've discovered is the most likely.
Right.
So huge amounts of damage.
You're opening a door, by the way, that I have not yet opened as a parent of a 7-year-old. I'm making a mental note about that word and going to look it up later, and it terrifies me.
Oh, you don't know what it is?
No. I mean, I can guess.
No, it's so important. It's so important. I need to make this clear that boys, so first of all, girls are pressured a lot to send nudes, but that's mostly by the boys that they know, and it is also by strangers. But the girls are more defensive. They're not as stupid as the boys. They're not as easily tricked. Yeah. So sextortion, it's rings of criminals, especially in Nigeria and Southeast Asia, that have discovered that if you just pretend to be a sexy girl. You send a semi-nude to a boy and you flirt with them and you say, now send me a picture of you. And as soon as they send a picture that includes their penis, you got them. Yeah. And then you say, send me $200 now. And and a lot of them, I don't know how many, but dozens have killed themselves that night.
Right. So you've just made a convincing case for why I don't actually ever want to leave my son alone in a room with a device or otherwise for fear of what he will figure out how to do.
Well, that's right. That's right. So the general rule really needs to be no screens in the bedroom, especially overnight. No. I wish I had done that. In my family, we were great about keeping the kids off social media, but they did have, and also during COVID, everybody had their devices all the time. Yeah. But I'm sorry, to go back to your question, for boys, the thing to really focus on is all the different companies that make their money off of the boys' dopamine system. Yep. So that means all the things that give them frictionless, free, quick dopamine. Yep. So it's video games, especially early on, which are incredible now. They're not like what they were when you and I were kids. Very, very quick dopamine, very addictive. Then there's the porn when they get a little bit older. And then there's sports betting, even in high school. High school boys are betting on constantly. Video games have gambling now. It's insane what we're doing to boys. So it's not just social media. It's the whole technosphere. It's the whole attention economy is just devastating for boys' ability to pay attention or stay motivated.
We are getting into the harms that are possible for young people. And I don't want to spend too much time here until we get to the solutions part at the end of our conversation, then we can return right here. Because I want to pull back a second. First of all, I want to raise one criticism of your work that I've heard.
Please, let's
go. Which is, how do you respond to people who say, okay, I understand that there's a correlation, but is this causal?
Yeah. It's very easy. This is what social science is all about. If all we had was, mental health, depression shot up at the same time as kids got on social media. That's a simple historical correlation, and that doesn't really tell you much. But the fact that it happened in multiple countries at the same time does at least rule out something about the United States. Sure. More importantly, there are many, many other kinds of evidence. Yeah. The World Happiness Report, we have a review paper going through 7 different lines of evidence. Just very, very simply, there are a lot of experiments where you ask people to get off of social media for a week or two, and their levels of depression and anxiety go down to compare to a control group. Like, that's an experiment. Right. And there are about 35 of them, and they almost all show it when you keep them off for a week or two and you measure depression and anxiety. And one of the studies was done by Meta. It was called Project Mercury. They did it themselves. They themselves found that their own users, their levels of depression, anxiety, self-comparison went down after a week, and then they buried it. So I have very little patience now for the people who say, the evidence is just correlational. It's not. There is so much. And so if listeners would go to, it'll be in the World Happiness Report 2026, but you could also just look for Mountains of Evidence social media. We have a Substack post that lays it all out.
Okay, but now I want to go back to me. I want to go back to the first question that I brought up to you, which is like, why is it so hard for me to give up my phone? Because evidence or no evidence in aggregate, I know for myself personally, and I know our listeners feel this way because we talk about it often. I sometimes feel I cannot follow my own thoughts anymore. And I know that when I can find ways to step back from not just social media, but all of the various pings that my phone has to offer me, I can begin to hear myself think again.
That's right.
It's not the only way that I find my way to my attention, but it's a really big one. So you've been talking more recently about attention itself and how difficult it is for us to sustain our focus. And I'm curious, what has changed about the way our attention is actually developing?
Yeah. So when I wrote The Anxious Generation, I thought the biggest damage was the mental health. But now I realize it's not. much bigger is the destruction of the human ability to pay attention, or the diminishment. It's not destroyed, but it's a diminishment. There's a global diminishment. Wherever kids are raised with smartphones, they go through puberty without developing full executive function. That's the biggest diminishment, because that's going to be lasting. But even we adults, we are overwhelmed. We become scattered and fragmented. We lose our ability to focus. But as you said, if you take a break, and this is Johan Hari's wonderful book, Stolen Focus, is about, he takes a 3-month break. We can, because our brains developed back in the old days where we had a somewhat normal childhood, we can get it back if we just go off. Right. But there is a risk that for young people who went through puberty with this, that the diminishment will be lasting. Now you can do something, you can improve, but there'll be a permanent mark.
I just want to push back on something that you said, or raise something.
Please.
You said, I was raised when my parents were so convinced that cable was going to destroy my brain that we didn't get cable until I was a teenager. Does every generation have its version of this?
Yes, and that's the other main argument that I hear. That, this is, Socrates complained about writing. It's true that every generation freaks out about this. So, the idea that it's just another moral panic, just like previous ones, just like comic books, it's a fine hypothesis to raise. But there's never been one where the kids themselves said it was a problem. Kids were not saying we're being damaged by comic books. The kids were not saying we're being damaged by cable TV. The other thing is that television presents stories that are multiple minutes long. Often it's 20 minutes long or 90 minutes long. Yeah. And we could not take our televisions with us to school, to the bathroom. We couldn't take them into bed. Whereas, and that's why the 2010 to 2015 period is the decisive turning point, because that's where the tech and the companies and the stimulation now is with the kid all the time. It wasn't like that before 2010.
So this brings us to the hopefully very substantive part of our conversation that I'm going to call solutions.
Okay, yes. There are some solutions. Let's go.
Well, specifically, I want to speak to what matters to me about your work. Mm-hmm. I'm a parent. Yeah. I want to do right by my kid. Mm-hmm. I feel like most of the messages that culture gives me is that it's on my back alone.
Exactly.
Right? I gotta set the rules for my kid, and then I gotta stand over him and take that iPad out of his hand after 4 minutes and fight with him about whether he's going to then use the library computer to find his game.
It's constant. It's everywhere.
I feel like you have introduced and then acted upon this larger idea that you don't need to be a parent to be invested in the fixes here. In fact, you need to be invested in the fixes if you are a member of society.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So certainly the companies have done a lot. Meta in particular does a lot to try to control the dialogue, to try to seed stories. We're sensitive to parents' needs. So we'll put all these parental controls, most of which it turns out don't work, according to Arturo Bejar, who worked at Meta for a long time. Now, can you imagine any other industry in which companies made vast amounts of money from children, and there were credible charges from a lot of parents that this thing had killed their children, like literally, this is why my child is dead. And 30% of the girls who used this product said, it has harmed my mental health. And leaks from the company said, we are harming their mental health. And let's go further with engagement, which they used to call addiction, but then there was an edict, don't call it addiction, call it problematic use. If there was any other consumer product that had this record, it would have been banned and sued into non-existence instantly. Right. And for some reason, there's an interesting legal issue about Section 230, but for some reason, we've just accepted technology is inevitable. Well, what are you going to do? Well, guess what? We can do something. And that's what's been so exciting about the last 2 years. When my book came out in 2024, one of the main criticisms I got was, what are you going to do? The technology's not going away.
Kids these days.
Well, no, but it's not. No, it's not kids these days. It's not like, those. It's like we have to prepare our kids for this future. That it's going to be in their future. Therefore, we have to let them on it. Mm-hmm. Which is like saying sex is in their future. Therefore, we have to send them to brothels. Like they should learn when they're 7. Let them, warm up to it, which is insane. And so, at least for the kids, the solutions are actually pretty easy. Adults is harder, but for kids, the solution, a large part of the solution is that we all recognize this is a set of collective action problems. Each one of us trying to say no, you can't have an iPad till you're 7. No, you can't have social media. Each one of us then faces, but everybody else has one. Mm-hmm. My friends all have one. Mom, I'm bored. our kids aren't begging for alcohol or gambling, because there's an age limit on those. So the solution is to have some clear norms. And the 4 norms that I propose in the anxious generation are: no smartphone before high school. Do not get your child a smartphone or an iPad. Do not give them their own touchscreen device until they're in high school. Let their brain at least get partway into puberty before you do that to them. The second norm is no social media before 16. Really, the age should be 18. This is an adult activity. But my strategy was, if we go for 18, we're not going to get it as a national or global norm.
Yeah.
But 16, I thought we could get, and we're getting it. All over the world now, it's rising. States have raised it to 16. We'll see if they're able to get it through the courts. The third norm is phone-free schools, and that's been a spectacular success. 20 states did it right and banned phones for the whole day. 22 states or so did it wrong. They just banned it during class, which is foolish, because what are the kids doing between class and at recess? They're all on their phones. But we're moving on those. And then the fourth norm is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. We got to give kids back a play-based childhood. So for kids, we can break out of this collective action trap. For adults, it's harder. So let's talk about that. What are the problems? What are the problems where you think there are solutions, or you want to talk about solutions?
Well, in particular, I want to understand how I can have a physical economy again so that I don't need to participate digitally.
Yeah. So we all feel a compulsion to pick up our phones. Many of us know that our lives would be better if we could slow down, have more periods of focused concentration, that 10, 20, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, rather than the sort of the shallow work, the multitasking that seems to take up a lot of our lives. So there are a couple of reasons, a couple of concepts I'll put out there that might be helpful to listeners. One is just the concept of quick dopamine, traditional addiction models. If you have any app that gives you rewards in a variable ratio schedule and you're compulsively using it, and that's mostly social media, video games. The one experience I had was when I briefly was caught up in the crypto craze and, stupidly lost a lot of money. I mean, I
love that you shared that with us. Thank you.
It's like, look, I'm a professor. I do what I do. I should not be going anywhere close to investments. I found that when I would put in an order, if it hits this, I'll buy. And I would check 30 times a day. I would just keep checking. So I understand what it is to have that compulsion.
Yeah.
So part of it is the variable ratio rewards. Don't have anything on your phone that does that. Move it onto your computer. This is what I tell my MBA students. If you have to be on Instagram, get it off your phone. Only check it on your computer at home, because then you're not going to check it 30 times a day. But a lot of the compulsion isn't digital dopamine. A lot of it is work, workaholism, efficiency. And that in part comes from the demands of work. And we should talk about how we could have more humane work environments, because it is a collective action problem.
Okay, can I run by something that I've been just playing with?
Let's hear it.
I've been thinking about what our lives would be like if we had a slow food movement for work, where we thought about work as a right, and our right as humans is to have work that is sustainable, meaningful, and humane. How that would change the whole way that we spent our days and the whole way that maybe productivity worked in our country.
That is a beautiful vision. I'll sign up for it. And if someone starts that movement, my guess is it's not going to move the needle on actual workplaces, because right now employers have employers have a lot of power. It's hard to imagine workers organizing and saying, no, you must give us this. But so let me try to help that movement along. It's going to be a lot more effective if you can make the argument that this will, in the long run, improve productivity and profitability of companies. And the argument goes like this. Everyone should read Cal Newport's book, either Deep Work or Slow Productivity. Everyone should understand that our attention is one of our most valuable resources, and most of us give it away for free. I'm shocked to discover that most of my students get a notification every time they get an email. What? Because they don't know, they don't want to miss anything. So they don't know that their attention is valuable and should never be given away lightly, never. And so what I urge my students, because, a lot of them say, Professor Haidt, this would be great if I could live this way, but everyone else expects me to be responding. In fact, in my company, you have to respond within 15 minutes to texts and emails. which means this is a company that is designed to never let anyone think, to never give anyone 30 minutes of uninterrupted time. And so it's a collective action problem. And so what I urge my students to do is go buy a copy of one of Cal Newport's books or find one of his podcasts online, send it around. If you're a manager, you can send it all around to but if you've got the guts to talk to your superior, your managers, and say, I really want to do great work here, and I think I could if we could have 3 hours in the morning where we generally do whatever. It would depend on the company, but if you can make the case that we're all stuck in this, and if we could all get out together and have norms that balance ultimate productivity with the ability to have more than 10 minutes at a time of focus, we'll do better work.
Yeah.
So that's what I would urge. You start the movement, you make the moral case.
Okay.
And I'll work with my MBA students to make the financial case.
If you could come right behind me with the financial case, I'd appreciate that.
I think that,
I think we got something.
Actually, I think we do. I think that would work.
John, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. What fun to talk about these issues with you.
That was Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist and the author of The Anxious Generation. John also has a new book out for kids. It's called The Amazing Generation, Your Guide to Fun and Freedom in a Screen-Filled World. It's great. I suggest you purchase it and then just leave it around the house, for them to find. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks for joining us. I'll be right back here in the studio next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Rachel Karp, Ava Ahmad-Beghi, and Adam Yates. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gedron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.